Sound speeds, and welcome to a video that took me nearly 2 weeks to produce around my 60+ hour work week schedule, my weekend teaching schedule, and my regular duties as a husband and father. But I think it's going to be worth it because in this video, I'm putting head-to-head and testing all 4 lavalier microphones in the Deity product line as of January 2020. And I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently than I normally do. Normally, I give my opinion at the end, but because there's so many tests to do, over 100 audio samples in this video to be exact, I'm going to give my opinion after each and every one of them. That way, if you want to skip around, you can, using the timestamps that are in the description. Before we get going, full disclosure, Deity did send me every product that you're going to see reviewed in this video. And although they did send it to me for free, I'm not going to allow it to affect my opinion, so you can expect this to be a fair and honest review. On the note of audio tests, believe me, I know it's very repetitive hearing the same thing over and over again, but it does level the playing field and it's very helpful when you're comparing one mic to another. And on that note, none of my audio tests are very long. So if you want to hear the same one over and over again, which kind of helps you if you're trying to not compare so many mics at once and get overwhelmed, then by all means, note the timestamp and just play it over and over again from that point. Also note that in the audio testing portion of this video, I'm not doing any post-processing at all. I am doing a by-ear loudness level match, but that's it. For starters, we're going to be looking at the Connect Lav, which comes with the Deity Connect Wireless Microphone system, hence the name Connect Lav. It's very similar to the V.Lav, except that the V.Lav has a much longer cable and it has a smart chip, but then the Connect Lav does have a locking 3.5mm 1/8 inch connector on there. So since the V.Lav is about $50, we're going to call this about a $50 lavalier microphone for our purposes in this video. People online have said that the Connect Lav is very similar to the $130 Sennheiser ME2 lavalier microphone, but the Connect is much smaller than the ME2 and it doesn't have a tapered end and the ridge is a bit thicker. The Connect also has a smaller grill and you can't easily remove the clip, so forget about switching it to the other side. The ME2 also has a slightly longer connector, but most of that is strain relief, so you're forgiven for that one. The cables feel very similar, but there is a branded cable tie on the Connect Lav. So you see there are a few differences between the Connect Lav and the ME2, but then at less than 40% of the cost of an ME2, you'd expect there to be. But how do they compare sound-wise? You are listening to the Deity Connect Lav positioned directly on my sternum and hardlined directly into a Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sennheiser ME2 positioned directly on my sternum and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You are listening to the Deity Connect Lav held out and pointing at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sennheiser ME2 held out and pointing at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. Both mics are noisy and lack detail, but for most consumers, they're probably fine. The Connect Lav is a little more bassy and lacks in the mids a bit, which you can really hear when I held them out in front of me. The Connect Lav is also much more susceptible to plosives, probably because of the smaller grill, and it lacks in detail compared to the ME2, which sounds much more balanced through all frequency ranges. The ME2 also has a bit more of a high boost, which increases the sibilance just a bit. The Deity W.Lav is the first lavalier microphone released by Deity designed to work with any and all transmitters regardless of the manufacturer's brand, because on the other end of the Lav, there is a microduct connector. So this is also the least expensive microduct connector lavalier microphone on the market. And provided you have the right adapter, you can adapt it for whatever transmitter you want to plug it up to. Because of its design and form factor, it's very similar to many of the old Sennheiser lavalier microphones that you may find on the used market. And for that reason, it's compatible with many of the same third-party accessories. But this is a $100 microphone, and I've seen people online saying it's very similar to the MKE3, also by Sennheiser. That's a $350 Lav, so let's see how they compare. The W.Lav's capsule is huge compared to the MKE2, and on that note, the W.Lav has a microduct connector on the end, which is also quite a bit larger once you adopt it to the wireless transmitter you're plugging it into. Both cables are also similar in that they transmit quite a bit of noise through them, much more than the other W.Lavs, I might add. But then, this is the only W.Lav in the series that has its own branded Deity cable tie, so there's at least that. The W.Lav doesn't look like much considering that it's just a black cylinder with a cable. But how does it compare in sound to the MKE2? You're listening to the Deity W.Lav positioned over my sternum and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sennheiser MKE2 positioned over my sternum and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Deity W.Lav held out and pointing at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices MixPre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sennheiser ME2, held out and pointing at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. No windscreen is being used. The W.Lav does sound much more balanced and detailed than the Connect Lav, but it's still very lacking compared to the ME2. The ME2 also has a presence boost that really makes it hit hard with the S sounds, so I imagine that would help it to sound a little bit more natural when it's underneath a shirt. The W.Lav is also much more bassy and lacking a bit in the mids, while the ME2 is much more natural, even if a bit sibilant. That said, I don't think the W.Lav is a very close competitor for the Sennheiser ME2. Internet, you're wrong. But I would say that comparing it to other microphones that are the same form factor like the older Sennheisers, by all means, yes. The Deity W.Lav Pro was the first lavalier microphone designed by Deity for use in the film and television industry, so that I'm happy about. It also features the same microdot connector that you'll find on other W.Lavs and a 4mm diameter capsule, and that capsule is rated IP57. If you're not familiar with IP ratings, that stands for Ingress Protection Code, and the first number represents how sealed it is to dust, and the second number is how sealed it is to water. The higher the rating, the better it is. And IP69 is the highest. This is a 57, which means it can resist almost all dust, but maybe a little bit gets through, but not enough to really mess it up. And it's completely water sealed for low-level submerges that are probably not more than about 30 minutes or so. Because of the W.Lav Pro's width, it makes it compatible with all Sanken COS11D third-party accessories. And for that reason, I'm going to compare this $150 microphone to the $350 Sanken COS11. Although the W.Lav Pro is a match in diameter for the COS11D, it's only about 3/5 in length. It also has a recessed grill versus the COS11, which has a very noticeable grill sticking off the top. For this reason, the W.Lav Pro may hold on to a droplet of water that hits the capsule, while the Sanken would just kind of shrug it off and resist it better. As discussed, the W.Lav does have its own waterproof IP rating, while the COS11 is water resistant, doesn't have an IP rating at all. The cable feels very similar too, very well made and flexible, but the W.Lav terminates to a microdot connector, and by the time you adapt that to a TA5, the connector is going to be about the same length, but it's going to be a little thinner in places. But how do those two mics sound? You're listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro, positioned over my sternum and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sanken COS11D, positioned over my sternum and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro, held out and pointing at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. No windscreen is being used. You're listening to the Sanken COS11D, held out and pointed at my mouth 1 foot away and hardlined directly into the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. No windscreen is being used. In this more reverberant room, the W.Lav Pro has a much more natural and pleasing sound to it. It's open and, dare I say, light even. In contrast, the COS11D sounds more nasally, raspy, and dark, especially after listening to the W.Lav Pro, which surprised me. And no, there isn't anything wrong with the COS11D either. If you were expecting it to sound better, then chalk it up to bad acoustics in the room. Both of these lav mics have a much lower self-noise than any of the other lavs that we've tested thus far in this video. But the COS11 is over twice the price of the W.Lav Pro, so to my ear, I'm going to go with the W.Lav Pro, at least in our test here. The Deity W.Lav Micro is one of the smallest lavalier microphones on the market today. Don't confuse it with the microdot connector. That's it right there. Measuring in at only 3mm in diameter and 1.2mm in length, the Micro is smaller than the DPA 6060, but not quite as small as a Countryman B6 without the cap. But then, how often do you use a Countryman B6 without a cap? The W.Lav Micro is small enough to fit through a buttonhole and secure behind a button, which is what I did right here. And that makes it compatible with many of the same accessories as the DPA 6060. So just for fun, we're going to compare the $200 Micro to the $650 DPA 6060. Admittedly, this is not a fair test. The W.Lav Micro does win out on size with its shorter and thinner capsule than on the 6060, but then the 6060 is ruggedized, so it can withstand a lot more punishment. Both cables feel great, they're flexible and sturdy, but the DPA's microdot connector is much thinner and shorter than the one on the Micro. Both microdots appear to be ruggedized, but the DPA's looks and feels stronger, which makes sense considering that it's over 3 times the price. But how do they sound in comparison? We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Micro right on the center of my sternum. This is the DPA 6060 positioned directly over my sternum. We're now listening to the W.Lav Micro about 1 foot away from my mouth and pointed directly at it. This is the DPA 6060 positioned about 1 foot away from my mouth and pointed directly at it. The W.Lav Micro does sound a bit more open than the 6060 in this environment, but at the same time more thin, hollow, and lacking in the mids. The 6060 does sound more full and accurate in comparison, and while the W.Lav Micro does have a very low noise floor, the DPA is king over all other lavs in that department. Now, I don't want it to sound like I'm just poo-pooing the W.Lav Micro, but when you compare it to a 6060, sorry. Now, the W.Lav Micro is very natural sounding. It has a very, very accurate natural sound, and I do really like the way that sounds. So I do want to make sure that we establish that I do like the sound of it before we move on. So while some of those comparisons may not have been fair, that at least shows you how the Deity Lavs compare to the microphones they've been compared against online, either because of design and look or based on the third-party accessories that they're compatible with. But I do want to add one more thing. The W.Lav Pro and Micro do have a clip that allows you to rotate it around on either side. That is not the case with the Connect or the W.Lav. The Connect Lav is only available with the Connect Wireless Microphone system and includes only a foam pop filter to go on top of it, while the Deity W.Lavs come individually packaged in their own boxes. And if you don't look at the front of them, you might not be able to tell what exactly they are. But there you go. On the inside of each box, you find that each Lav comes with its own carrying case, and they look identical, but the layout on the W.Lav is a little different from the other two. The main difference is that the W.Lav comes with a white furry high windscreen cover, and it also has black foam windscreens that match the Lavalier. The W.Lav Pro and Micro come with smaller beige windscreens. They all come standard with one beige Rycoat advanced overcover, 5 Rycoat advanced rounds, and thin black duct tape. Duct tape. Yeah, duct tape. Rant alert. Do not ever use duct tape to affix a microphone to anybody's skin. That's a good way of making sure that they never let you ever put a lav mic on them ever again. It's going to take the skin off of my hand when I remove it. And not only that, if you put it on clothing, the wardrobe department's not going to like it because it's going to tear out a lot more fabric and even maybe burst seams that you were not expecting. Sure, it may be on there well and not going anywhere, but okay, that's going to leave a mark. Now let's see how each lavalier cable deals with transfer noise. That is noise transmitted through the cable to the capsule. And right now I'm wearing the Connect Lav. If I were to put this over here and then touch the cable, you hear that pretty well on the capsule itself. But over here, not so much. So if you're going to use a Connect Lav, you might consider adding some sort of strain relief loop or something like that if it's going to be hiding underneath someone, or looping the cable up and through the Connect Lav like that to try to reduce some of that noise. Didn't help a whole lot. Now let's try the Deity W.Lav. All right, that's pretty outrageous. You're even hearing some transfer noise through here. That's a lot of transfer noise. So I don't even think that a strain relief loop is going to do very well on the W.Lav at all. Even one of these little doodads that normally works, no, not at all. So the W.Lav, a lot of transfer noise there. The W.Lav Pro will also transfer sound through the cable if you do it very close to the capsule. But here, it's a lot less. I mean, you still hear it, but it is less. So a strain relief loop like this would normally be better provided it grabbed the cable, but this clip is not designed properly for that. So you're going to hear all that transfer noise there. But considering that the W.Lav Pro is designed for you to use in the film work, hiding underneath clothing, probably not going to be an issue because you're going to strain relief that anyway. The W.Lav Micro does transmit the least amount of noise of any of the Deity Lavs so far. You're going to always hear transmit noise when the capsule is directly in line with it. But what about here? When it's not taut, or when it's taut, no transfer noise at all. So I would say that the Deity Micro has the best chance of resisting any kind of transmit noise through it. Now, that is to say that this clip is, again, not designed properly. But considering that the Micro and the Pro are both designed to be used without the clip and directly on, or rather underneath clothing, it's going to be great for you once you put all of it on and secure it the proper way. Now, what about cable length? I mean, how long is each one of these cables? I measured each microphone from the end of the capsule all the way down to the end of the connector in the exact same place. The Connect Lav and the W.Lav measured in right around 64 inches, while the W.Lav Pro and Micro each were around 74 inches, plus or minus a little bit. To me, that speaks volumes because the Connect Lav and the W.Lav both have a 64-inch cable that is long enough to get down to a belt pack like you would use in ENG or reality TV, but it's not long enough to go over someone's shoulder and down to an ankle strap like we commonly do in the film industry. The W.Lav Pro and Micro, you can do that with, provided the person's not too tall like I am. But then the W.Lav Pro and the Micro are designed for us in the film industry, so at least that's a plus. Another indicator of quality is the noise floor of the microphone. So what I did is I took the sensitivity rating for each of the microphones listed underneath the tech specs, and I set that as the gain amount for my Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. And based on that, I double-checked and all my levels seemed just fine, so I recorded the noise floor, and here they are. In my opinion, the Connect Lav has an unacceptably high amount of self-noise, and considering that that's the Lavalier microphone you sent out with the Deity Connect Wireless Microphone system, and people complain of self-noise on that system, it kind of rings some bells here in my mind as something to test. You may be looking at the spec on the W.Lav and saying, what's that? It doesn't sound like it's nearly that high. I'm going to show you what I found though. A moment ago, you heard the transfer noise in this ultra-stiff W.Lav cable, and so when I measured it, it was negative 35.4 dB, simply because there was so much low end there. You could see it in Vox and Go span. The frequency spectrum showed tons of rumbling noise underneath 80 Hz, so what I did is I went into Vox and Go Curve, and I built the world's most aggressive roll-off, and I knocked off all frequencies below 80 Hz, and upon resetting, I measured a negative 65.07 noise floor. So let me go ahead and go on the record now in saying that I am not a fan of the W.Lav's very stiff, noisy cable. It transmits way too much noise for my ear. But if you have a W.Lav, keep this in mind, because if you apply a roll-off, you should be able to knock out any of those rumbly frequencies that you run into. Maybe an aggressive roll-off, but at least you should be able to preserve most of the dialogue without cutting too much into it. With regards to the W.Lav Pro and the Micro, even though the Micro is about 5 dB higher noise floor than the Pro, both of them are very good specs, and you can get very good results out of those. So why don't we do some field testing of these Lavs? How about 3 interior locations and 3 exterior locations? And we're going to do the testing with the Lavs on the outside of a t-shirt and on the inside of a t-shirt. Let's hear. This is the sound of the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. I'm now wearing the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. You're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of a quiet bedroom. We're listening to the Deity Connect Lavalier microphone on the center of my chest, outside of the shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, outside of a shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, outside of the shirt, in a garage. You're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the Deity Connect Lavalier microphone on the center of my chest, underneath a shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, underneath a shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, in a garage. We're now listening to the W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, in a garage. I'm now wearing the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of my car. I'm now wearing the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and inside of my car. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, on the outside of my shirt, and inside of my car. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, on the outside of my shirt, and inside of my car. We're now listening to the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of my car. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of my car. I'm now wearing the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of my car. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and inside of my car. I'm now wearing the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, and in a quiet residential area. I'm now wearing the Deity V.Lav on the center of my chest, over top of my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. I'm now wearing the W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, on the outside of my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. This is the sound of the W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, on the outside of my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. I'm now wearing the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. I'm now wearing the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and outdoors in a quiet residential area. We're listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. This is now the W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, underneath my shirt, and outside in a quiet residential area. We're now listening to the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. We are listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest, outside of my shirt, in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. We are now listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro outside of my shirt on the center of my chest in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. You are now listening to the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest outside of my shirt in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. We are now listening to the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. You are now listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. You are now listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. You are now listening to the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in an outdoor environment with medium ambience. We're now listening to the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my chest outside of my shirt in a very noisy environment by an interstate. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest outside of my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest outside of my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We are now listening to the W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest outside of my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We're now listening to the Deity Connect on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We're now listening to the Deity W.Lav on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We are listening to the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. We are listening to the W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest underneath my shirt in a very noisy outdoor area. The Connect Lav isn't nearly as crisp or detailed and is very spotty in mid-range frequencies. It doesn't sound balanced through all the frequencies and is way too sibilant unless you wear it underneath a shirt. And it's not designed to be worn under a shirt, so why would you do that? The W.Lav has way too much low end while lacking a bit in the mids. It's also too sibilant when worn outside of a shirt for my ear, but then it's more detailed than the Connect. Underneath a shirt though, that's probably its best bet, even though it's a little bit on the big side. The W.Lav Pro sounds very pleasant. It's very open and detailed, very natural, both under and over top of a shirt. It's also got a little bit of a low-end boost, but it's not too much, so it's not really a killer. The W.Lav Micro sounds very natural too, but it's a little bit thinner than the Pro, and probably because it doesn't have that low-end boost. It is not as open as the Pro, and probably more accurate to the way I really sound in reality, so I can't really fault it for that. None of Deity's Lavs have much of a presence boost at all, so if you're recording in a quiet environment, it's going to sound pretty good, but if you need a presence boosted Lav to cut through a mix, then you're probably not going to be happy with the way that they cut through. Sometimes hiding a Lav straight up and down is not going to be your best option. And if it doesn't give you your best sound, you might need to go sideways or even downwards. Like for example, the shirt I'm wearing right now, I put a Lav sideways right there. And what would this do to the sound of these different Lavs? This is the Deity Connect Lav positioned on the middle of my chest, pointed straight up in the air. This is the Deity Connect Lav positioned on the middle of my chest, pointed directly to the side. This is the Deity Connect Lav positioned on the middle of my chest, pointed straight down towards the floor. This is the Deity W.Lav positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight up in the air. This is the Deity W.Lav positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight to the side. This is the Deity W.Lav positioned on the middle of my chest, pointed straight down towards the floor. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro on the center of my chest, pointed straight up in the air. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight to the side. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight down towards the ground. This is the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, pointed straight up in the air. This is the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, pointed sideways. This is the Deity W.Lav Micro on the center of my chest, pointed straight downwards towards the ground. The Connect Lav didn't change much regarding orientation, but the W.Lav, when it was pointed straight down, it lost a little bit in the mids and highs and reduced the sibilance, and I actually thought it sounded better in that case. The W.Lav Pro sounded best when it was pointed straight up towards my mouth, and it closed up a little bit and lost a little bit of detail when it was sideways and pointed downwards. Not enough to be a deal breaker, but it is something to note. The W.Lav Micro was the surprise of the bunch. When it was pointed to the side, it sounded almost as good as the Pro, and that's because the mids and highs attenuated ever so slightly, allowing the bass to come up and kind of fill it out. And that only worked because it didn't drop in detail any, just like it didn't when it was pointed straight down toward the ground. However, it did drop a little bit in the mids when pointed downwards, And I really wouldn't worry about that too much. It was noticeable, but only slightly. All of Deity's lavs released as of the time of this video are omnidirectional. But what would happen if you closed off all of those directions except what's straight down the barrel? That's kind of like what it would be like if you were to hide a mic inside of a tie, which is a very common place for us to hide mics inside the film industry. Always look for that little dimple right there, and there's most likely a lav hiding in there. So how would this sound on each of these lavs? This is the way the Deity Connect Lav sounds inside of a tie if that tie is tied into a full Windsor. This is the way the Deity W.Lav sounds inside of a tie if that tie is tied into a full Windsor. This is the way the Deity W.Lav Pro sounds inside of a tie if that tie is tied into a full Windsor. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav Micro inside of a tie if that tie is tied in a full Windsor. Really, there's not much to note here. Each microphone sounded at their very best, or at least lost very little and were very usable and passable when pointed downwards out of my tie, despite the fact that my voice was above it. But on that note, sometimes lavs have more reach in the direction that they're pointing. So what would that do to the pickup when pointed straight downwards? I mean, are we going to hear footsteps louder if they're pointed downwards versus upwards? Let's give it a listen. The W.Lav Pro is the only microphone that seemed to pick up my footsteps at the same volume regardless of whether it was pointed upwards or downwards. The other three picked up my footsteps louder when pointed downwards. There you go. Sometimes lavs are used as plant microphones due to their small size and hideability. So what would they sound like inside my car visor or maybe planted behind my keyboard on my desk, which is made of wood? And being that they're omnidirectional, I think this is worth investigating. This is the sound of the Deity Connect Lav being used as a plant microphone over top of my head inside of my car visor. This is the sound of the Deity W.Lav being used as a plant microphone over top of my head in my car visor. You're listening to the W.Lav Pro being used as a plant microphone over top of my head in my car visor. You're listening to the W.Lav Micro being used as a plant microphone over top of my head in my car visor. This is the way the Deity Connect Lav sounds if it's being used as a plant microphone and placed approximately 18 inches away from my mouth on the other side of my keyboard. This is the way the Deity W.Lav sounds if it's being used as a plant microphone approximately 18 inches away from my mouth and on the other side of my keyboard. This is the way the Deity W.Lav Pro sounds if it's being used as a plant microphone approximately 18 inches away from my mouth and on the other side of my keyboard. This is the way the Deity W.Lav Micro sounds if it's being used as a plant microphone approximately 18 inches away from my mouth and on the other side of my keyboard. Acoustics are certainly something to consider every time you put down a plant microphone, and I did nothing at all to change these environments. Now, inside of my car over my visor, it did sound very close and present, but very sterile sounding, and part of that's because my voice just absorbed into the walls, and so it did give you kind of a claustrophobic feel. When planted on my desk, though, the omnidirectional microphone patterns really seemed to hurt our sound quite a bit. It picked up way too much reflected sound off the desk, and a lot of it was bass, so it muddied it all up. It's better to use a more directional pattern microphone if you're planted farther away, so that way you can reject out more of those sounds that you don't care anything about. But I will tell you this. Despite the fact that all of the bass seemed to come up on all of the microphones, the Micro actually did seem to do the very best with the bass that entered the capsule. And that's probably because most of the time it's a pretty flat microphone, and the bass that came up into it wasn't enough to really make it overpoweringly bassy. Speaking of overpowering, how well do you think each lav would survive being yelled into? We're about to find out, but I do want to point out that my volume intentionally starts very low and then I raise it up to the point I'm yelling. But the volume shouldn't get overly loud, but even then you might want to ride the volume level knob just to be on the safe side. I'm speaking into the Deity Connect Lav and raising my voice louder and louder with the microphone just off axis to my mouth so that I don't blast it with plosives. It's 1 foot away from my mouth and I'm yelling into the microphone now at full volume! I hope you can understand me! I'm now now speaking into the Deity W.Lav and raising my voice louder and louder with the microphone just off axis to my mouth so that I don't blast it with plosives. I'm now yelling into the microphone as loud as I possibly can. I hope it's not clipping. I'm now speaking into the W.Lav Pro and the microphone is 1 foot away from my mouth and I'm raising my voice louder and louder with the microphone just off axis to my mouth so that I don't blast it with plosives. I'm yelling at the microphone at full volume now. I'm now speaking into the W.Lav Micro about 1 foot away from my mouth and I'm raising my voice louder and louder with the microphone just off axis to my mouth so I don't blast it with plosives. I'm yelling into the microphone at full volume now! The Connect Lav and the W.Lav seem to clip just a little bit, but the Pro and the Micro seem to clip all over the place. Now, perhaps because of YouTube or maybe because your ear isn't tuned to my voice, you weren't able to hear it. So what I'm going to do is pull out the HyperWhistle. Advertised as the world's loudest whistle, it's going to be a constant tone. And because it's so loud in this test, I'm going to bring the audio level way down. You can bring it up if you want to, but if you hear the tone waver, warble, do anything other than just sound consistent, then that's distortion. Did you hear the distortion on the Pro and the Micro that time? You should have been able to. It was all over the place. You even heard it on the Connect and the W.Lav that time. Now, I do want to point out that because I started about 3 feet away from the mic and came into about 1 foot away, you were probably, by the end at least, hearing a little bit of wind hitting the lavaliers. And that's because they weren't wearing any wind protection. But speaking of wind protection, why don't we test them with the foamies that they came with? This is the Deity Connect Lav without wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the Connect Lav with wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the Deity W.Lav without wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the Deity W.Lav with wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the W.Lav Pro without wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the W.Lav Pro with wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the W.Lav Micro without wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. This is the W.Lav Micro with wind protection on, approximately 6 inches away from my mouth in a quiet bedroom. Pesky porcupines prefer pink pickles. Big boys bow before Beavis. All of the Lavs popped like crazy when they weren't wearing any wind protection at all, but that's to be expected. I was close micing and pointing my mouth straight at them, saying everything, trying to kill it with plosives. Now, with the foam windscreens, it did seem to resist most of them. Some plosives did manage to pop the mic, but then that's to be expected. But more importantly, it didn't affect the acoustics a whole lot. What I would say, though, is if you were wearing the Lavs on your chest with the wind protection, it would resist an occasional breath from your nose, maybe even a light wind in the air, provided an air conditioning then isn't pointed straight at you. But if you were going to go outside, use a different wind protection because a light breeze would probably wipe it out. But that's why you have the advanced overcover that it came with, right? And if you don't want to use those, then there are other options available on the market, and I test a lot of them in this video right here if you'd like to check it out. Professionals have many wind protection options to choose from, and will typically choose them according to how much wind protection we actually need. If it's too much, then it's going to be harder to hide underneath clothing, and it's going to muffle the sound more. Now, on that note, the W.Lav does come with a high wind protection foamy. So we're not going to test it against wind. What we're going to test it is to see how acoustically transparent it is, both without and with the wind protection on. We're now listening to the wind protection on the W.Lav, and this is with the microphone directly on the center of my chest and without any wind protection at all. This is now the Deity W.Lav positioned directly on the center of my chest and using the heavy-duty white wind protection. This is our second pass of the microphone directly on the center of my chest without any wind protection at all. This is how it sounds. And this is one last time, the Deity W.Lav positioned directly on the center of my chest and using the high wind protection option that looks like a big furry ball. As expected, the Furry did pull back the highs quite a bit. The tonal quality of the microphone definitely did change as the detail went down ever so slightly. But it did seem to flatten out the frequency response too, which is a good thing unless you're expecting that presence boost to still be present to help you cut through some background noise. And in that case, get yourself a different wind protection option because this one won't cut it. In theater and sometimes in film and television, you have to hide a lav inside someone's wig at their hairline. And in that case, how would these lavs sound? This is the Deity Connect Lav on the center of my forehead, where it would be if I were wearing a wig and trying to hide this underneath my hairline. This is the Deity W.Lav positioned on the center of my forehead and placed where it would be if I were wearing a wig and trying to hide this underneath my hairline. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro positioned on the center of my forehead, where it would be if I were wearing a wig and trying to hide this underneath my hairline. This is the Deity W.Lav Micro placed on the center of my forehead, where it would be if I were wearing a wig and trying to hide it under my hairline. All the mics sounded very close and present, which is great, but that's because my hairline was right here. If it were higher, then you might want to add a little bit of presence to help bring out the voice. Finally, the last test. Now, what could it possibly be? I did mention that the W.Lav Pro has an IP57 rating, so we're going to test it against water. But I want to point out that I'm going to start by showing you what I did to the lav, and then after that, do the before and after test. And the reason why is so that way you see what I did to the lav, but then back to back, you have the lav test itself. So that way you can easily listen to it over and over again without all this water in the middle. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight up towards my mouth before I pour water on the mic, testing the IP57 rating. This is the Deity W.Lav Pro positioned on the center of my chest, pointed straight up towards my mouth after I poured water all over the microphone and even dumped it, submerging it a couple of times while I shook it off, testing the IP57 rating. I'm curious if you heard the same thing that I did. To me, it sounded like my voice before and after were different. So what I did is I listened to the noise floor and brought it up in Vox Span and compared the frequency responses. And believe it or not, they were identical both before and after. So I thought about it. And I think what happened is that my voice is naturally sometimes lower and naturally sometimes higher. So I think my voice just changed a little bit between those two tests. And so if I were to be critical about it, I would say that maybe before there were a little bit more highs, but that's just me reaching. Now, if you want to hear how I sounded most accurately, in my opinion, it's if you go about halfway through both tests. Listen to it there versus listen to it after. And before and after, when you're listening halfway through the tests, you'll cut back and forth between those and probably hear it as sounding really close like I do. In case you're wondering, yes indeed, the W.Lav Pro's recessed microphone capsule did grab a little droplet of water, so I did have to shake it out and even blow it out before recording the after audio test. Now that we've completed all of our audio testing, I do want to point out a few things. The first is that at the time of this video, longer cables are not an option for any Deity Lavalier microphone. The only way to get a longer cable on one would be to get yourself a V.Lav, cut off however much of the 5-meter long cable you want to have on your lav, and then solder the appropriate end on there that matches your transmitters. And that would give you a Connect Lav. And if you're curious, it's only 2 pins that you have to worry about. The center is hot and the chassis is ground. That at least gives you a Connect Lav if that's what you want. If you do decide to go that route, keep in mind that Deity Lavs have a 3-volt bias and no special resistors are necessary. Also note that at the time of this video, the Connect and W.Lavs are only available in black, while the Pro and Micros are only available in beige. If you're wanting additional colors, Deity does have plans to release additional colors at some point in the future, but right now, your hiding options are limited to what you can do with these colors. But I would like to ask Deity something. Hey, Deity, if you do decide to release additional colors in the future, would you mind sending me one of each color? Because I'm curious to see if the sound quality is affected by the color. Yeah, that's it. Also, I wanted to note that Deity Lavs carry with it a 1-year factory warranty. So there you have it. Test after test of every Deity Lavalier microphone released as of January 2020 and sounding at their very best at that, because I did not go into any wireless transmitters for any of these tests. They were all hardlined directly into my sound device's mix pre-6 using the Deity DXLR. So what do I think of Deity's lavalier microphones? Well, let me start with the Connect Lav. As you can imagine, I'm not the least bit of a fan of it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go as far as to say that here's a strong recommendation for you, Deity. You include this microphone with your wireless Connect system, and then you hear people complain about high self-noise. I think it's because of this microphone, not because of the Connect system itself. I'm going to test this more in the future, but to include this Lav with your Connect system does not do it justice. So I would say swap out this microphone or do anything you possibly can to reduce the self-noise of it, because this isn't cutting it. After my disappointment with the Connect Lav, you may be expecting my W.Lav opinion to be equally as harsh, but it's not. This definitely does sound better than the Connect Lav. And I will point out that for consumers, it's great. For prosumers, it's probably pretty good. For entry-level professionals, yeah, there's a couple of things to point out. If it's ENG or reality, fine. Corporate events, fine. But if you're hoping to use this for the film industry, oh no, save up an additional $50 and get yourself a W.Lav Pro, because this is not going to fit that need at all. If you're doing interviews in an area with high wind, then the W.Lav does come with the Furry as an option for wind protection. But keep in mind that this little bitty nylon twine does unravel pretty easily. So cut it even and take a lighter to it, and it won't unravel ever again. The Deity W.Lav Pro, yes, actually, it's $150 and a steal of a deal at that. And on that note, it's very open and natural sounding. It's small. It's compatible with many third-party accessories that are flooding the market right now. And it's waterproof. That's a good deal. I'm also a fan of the W.Lav Micro, which sounds really good considering how small it is. It's very natural sounding without frequency boosts, and it's compatible with many DPA 6060 third-party accessories, which makes it a plus, even though it might be a little bit on the small side for some of them because it is smaller than the 6060. In short, if you're looking for a Deity Lav with a presence boost, then the W.Lav is your option. But if you're wanting a natural tone, then look no farther than the W.Lav Pro or Micro. And as soon as they're available in something other than beige, like black, then I'm definitely going to want to be adding a few to my kit. So here's how we're going to end this. The Connect Lav, the W.Lav, and the Pro and Micro. And on that note, let me add one more thing to Deity. Get rid of the duct tape. I mean, come on, what is this? Hashtag triggered. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sound Speeds. Be sure to tune in the future for more reviews, irritating things, and sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.